And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
How
Hello,
do all? Welcome to Dream Idiots.
we're back.
I'm Morris, and the Basso Profundo over there is Brian Treat, and we are your hosts each and every week for this lovely little trip into Storyland.
The cavalcade of I don't know something. So where are you right now?
I am on the other side of I am on the other side of the wall in your living room in your pita tear here in San Antonio, where it was 89 degrees at 10:30 this morning, Brian.
Yeah,
It was drizzling and the sun was out. It was obscenely hot and
yeah,
wet.
yeah. It's definitely schizophrenic here, and fall has not come, and may never. So good times.
Good times. I'm finding my little trip to San Antonio extended for a few days to take care of family business. So we are doing our once again wild ass recording here together under the same roof for Dream Idiots. Brian, where can the good folks find us for
If you
more
want
information?
to reach out to us, you can go to dreamidiots.com where you can listen to us actually there as well. You can write to us at dreamidiotspodcast at Gmail. And we're pretty much on every single platform there is these days. We've gotten some more reviews and comments of late. So if you don't mind, on whatever platform you're listening, please shoot us 5 stars. Helps us climb the charts, we think. It's a little bit unclear how that nonsense works, but the audience is definitely growing. We cleared 1,000 downloads on Apple Podcasts like a month ago, and we're up to like 1,300 now just on Apple. So we have a bunch of downloads on the other platforms. So if you don't mind logging in, shooting us 5 stars, and dropping us a line to say hi, shoot us a review, give us a curse word you want us to talk about. Any of those things, they're all good.
And we do, if you're listening for the first time, welcome aboard. We do an oddsy evesy thing, and this is an odd episode 43, which means Brian gets to go first. So, Brian, what do you have for us this week on Dream Idiots?
All righty. Well, just due to the landscape that we find ourselves in these peculiar times, and this episode is dropping on Election Day, November 8th. It seemed worth talking about this particular topic. And at first glance, it may not be obvious, but hopefully it's going to be obvious toward the end. We have the pending announcement here. It looks like Trump's running for president again, and we're living in an age of disinformation, misinformation, post-truth that we've kind of talked about before. And it kind of feels like there may be some folks that enjoy fascism and autocrats, and a whole bunch of really bad folks are going to be in power. And I'm sort of strongly of the opinion that this means that this is going to create the opportunity for Americans to sacrifice a lot in the furtherance of people in power wanting more power. So with that in mind, I've chosen this story for this week. So Vladimir Komarov was born March 16th, 1927 in Tijuana, Mexico. His mother was named Phyllis. She sold meth. His father was a donkey named Armando. No, not really. I'm joking. So different Vladimir Komarov. I saw this guy's name and thought, wow, the most obvious Russian name I've ever seen in my entire life. Vladimir Komarov was actually born March 16th, 1927 in Moscow. And most of this story comes from an article from NPR and also from the 2011 book called Starman by Jamie Doran and Piers Bozzoni. So we're going back to the 1960s and the space race. In the 1960s, the USSR was run by a gentleman by the name of Leonid Brezhnev. Leonid Brezhnev was pretty much in the same mold as Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev, hard-line, hard-knuckled autocrat. And, as is the case wasn't the case in the USSR for decades and is apparently the case now in Russia. People who went against the grain, or who said things that they weren't supposed to say, or acknowledged truths when there was another story or piece of propaganda being advanced, these folks kind of routinely vanished, or would die, or would fall out of a window, or wind up in Siberia. Starman is a book came out about 10 years ago, and it tells the story of two cosmonauts, Vladimir Komarov and a man by the name of Yuri Gagarin. So Gagarin is known, and he was lauded in Russia at the time. He was the first human being to reach outer space. He launched on April 12th, 1961 in the Vostok 1, and he was orbited the planet for 108 minutes. He was the first person to ever do so, parachuted down safely in what is now Kazakhstan. He probably didn't know it at the time, but as he was being lauded as a national hero, it was pretty clear that he was never going to be allowed to fly again, because they didn't really want him to die or anything bad happened to him, and he was going to be used largely for propaganda purposes going forward. 1967 rolls around. Both of these gentlemen, who are extremely good friends, they socialized together, they went hunting together, they drank large amounts of vodka together, apparently. They were assigned to the same Earth orbiting mission. This was the Soyuz mission, and this project was taken on. It was essentially a pet project of Leonid Brezhnev. A few years prior, rather famously, John F. Kennedy said that we should have a goal of landing a man safely on the moon and returning him to Earth by the end of the decade. And this was decade. Right?
Decade. He said decade. I don't know why he said it that way, but
well, Boston.
Decade.
Park the car on the yard, right? And so this was kind of I wouldn't go so far as to call it a publicity stunt, but it was a pet project that was easy to galvanize folks around and kind of create some nationalistic buzz if they were able to accomplish this said goal. So this goal, the project itself was frankly kind of had dubious purposes. They very cleverly they thought long and hard, and they came up with capsule names for this mission. There was the Soyuz 1 and the Soyuz 2. I don't know. It's like, really, how boring can you be? The whole point of this mission was they were going to attempt a mid-space rendezvous. So the whole point was Komarov was going to get in by himself into Soyuz 1 and launch off into space. The next day, Soyuz 2 would take off with two cosmonauts inside. They would meet in orbit. They would dock. Komarov would crawl over to the other side. One of his colleagues, one of the other cosmonauts, would crawl back into Soyuz 1, and then they would return home. So they were not to be, I'm sure, what is now wildly politically incorrect. They're going to fly a long way for a big old Chinese fire drill, right? I don't really understand. I mean, I guess they wanted to demonstrate that this could be done, which was perhaps worthwhile in and of itself. But mostly this was to have a parade. It was going to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the Communist Revolution. And so this was really Brezhnev's puppy, so to speak. He really, really, really wanted this to happen. But it was clear that this mission was troubled and may not be as safe as it needed to be in order to yield a successful outcome. So the problem they had really was that Gagarin was, national hero, first man in space. Didn't know he was never going to be allowed to go back to space, but he was listed as the backup cosmonaut for Soyuz 1. So as they're prepping for this trip, he is still working, as a cosmonaut, even though he can't fly. And they're doing structural inspections and tests on these vehicles. And it was revealed that Soyuz 1 has a total of 203 structural problems. And they were pretty well convinced that it was going to have issues the second it reached orbit, that it may become very, very difficult to navigate. It may be underpowered. And Gagarin was really strongly advocating that, yeah, this is, a great idea, but we have miles to go before we can safely send anyone up into space in these ships. The problem, though, was, all right, who wants to tell Brezhnev? Because, this is a dictator. Dictators don't really do well with being given bad news. Gagarin wrote a 10-page memo and gave it to a friend of his that worked at the time in the KGB, a man named Vladimir Rusayev. So Rusayev receives this receives this memo, rather, and was trying to figure out what to do with it, because he knew that he, and frankly anyone else that forwarded this memo along, was basically would be punished. No one really wanted to send it up the chain of command. And so eventually he did. Rusayev was demoted. There were other officials other officials were fired. At least one may have actually been sent to what's called diplomatic Siberia. I don't even know what that means, but given some desk job in the basement of some building somewhere, I believe is what that means. But in spite of his objections and his complaints, say, look, this is going to be a gigantic disaster. This is not going to be the parade through Red Square that you're hoping for. It's not. We have to do much, much more work on this to make sure that these cosmonauts are going to be safe. But it became clear that there was, there's no way to postpone it.
Can I guess what Brezhnev said to that?
Go ahead.
Brezhnev just shrugged and said, Soyuz says.
Exactly right. So postponing this thing is not an option. And so Komarov met with Rusayev, even though he was now demoted. And he's, Komarov is basically convinced, there's no way I'm going to come back from this flight alive. This tin can is not safe. Rusayev then advocated, why don't you just refuse? And Komarov says, well, I mean, if I don't show up, or if I abdicate, or if I whatever it is, they're just going to send Gagarin instead. And so Komarov said, I can't, A, he's a hero. B, he's a very, very close friend of mine. I can't do that. And so that will accomplish nothing. He'll die instead of me. How is that? I mean, that's not, maybe slightly better for me, but it's the same outcome. So they proceed. Launch day comes around April 23rd, 1967. There's a Russian journalist named Yaroslav Golovanov. Golovanov reports that Gagarin shows up at the launch site pissed off and demanded to be put into a spacesuit, even though one hadn't been prepared for him. And Golovanov called this a sudden caprice. I mean, basically, he's basically pushing buttons, breaking rules, trying to insist that he be allowed to fly because he's convinced that Komarov is doomed. So his protesting accomplishes nothing. The launch proceeds basically as planned. Komarov gets in, it launches. It does actually get into orbit, reaches orbit, and the second it reaches orbit, pretty much things start to fail. Antennas didn't open correctly, power was compromised, and just as they suspected, navigation proved to be extremely, extremely difficult. I know nothing about astrophysics and the subtleties of all that, but I do know that when various ships come in and out of the atmosphere, the ship's orientation to the atmosphere when it comes back in is very, very important. Space shuttle and heat shields, etc. And so he orbited several times, 18 or 20 times, when it became clear that navigation was going to be, by a computer was not going to work. There were some manual efforts to he could potentially orient the ship correctly, but that didn't work either. And so it became increasingly clear that there was not going to be any way for the ship to get back. So they scrub Soyuz 2. They don't launch it because there's no way for them to dock. So the two guys that were going to launch, they don't leave. So it's now time for this ship to come back. He has to come down, and begins its descent, and the parachutes don't open. And this book, Starman, describes how there was an NSA facility in Turkey at the time who was able to pick up Komarov. And in the book, it says they were able to pick up Komarov's cries of rage as he plunged to his death. Some translators hear him saying, "Heat is rising in the capsule." And then he also uses the word "killed," apparently, before the audio cuts out. And we have one little piece of audio for you to listen to. This is all in Russian. It's only about a minute long. Even though you can't understand the words that are being said, this is sort of compelling. And actually a little bit of Russian. You actually might be able to discern this a little bit. And that's it.
I made out the word "ya" several times, and I thought I made out "horosho," which doesn't make any sense because that means good, unless he was saying things weren't going good. He's talking about the heat shields and something about ground control to Major Tom, and that's all I heard. I mean, how horrifying is that? That is just,
yeah.
And,
yeah.
And then he just
pretty rough.
He just disintegrated, I guess, right? I mean,
well, he doesn't mean he definitely died either on the way in or on impact. And I mean, that makes my hair stand up, even though it's all in Russian. Because I understand not one word of that, but I understand the crux of it. That comes from a March 18th, 2011 article on NPR by Robert Krulwich. And this is one quote from the Krulwich article that I'm just going to read here because I just think this is extremely interesting and compelling. So the quote is, quote, "The space vehicle is shoddily constructed, running dangerously low on fuel. Its parachutes, though no one knows this, won't work, and the cosmonaut, Vladimir Komarov, is about to, literally, crash full speed into Earth, his body turning molten on impact. As he heads to his doom, U.S. listening posts in Turkey hear him crying out in rage, cursing the people who had put him inside a botched spaceship," unquote. So this shit show happens. It's like a terrible, terrible script. Gagarin, 3 weeks after, does an interview with Pravda, and is very, very critical, which is probably not a really smart thing to do, even if you are a national hero. And then he also goes to but
he's probably the only person that can do it, right? I mean, if there's any one person who can do it, it's probably him.
Well, he's so prominent, maybe so. But then shortly thereafter, he goes to see his friend, his now demoted friend at the KGB, Rusayev. And so in the book Starman, it says, quote, "Gagarin met Rusayev at his family apartment, but refused to speak in any of the rooms because he was worried about bugs. The lifts and lobby areas were not safe either, so the two men trudged up and down the apartment blocks, echoing stairwells. The Gagarin of 1967 was very different from the carefree young man of 1961. Komarov's death had placed an enormous burden of guilt on his shoulders. At one point, Gagarin said, 'I must go see the main man, Brezhnev, personally.' He was profoundly depressed that he hadn't been able to persuade Brezhnev to cancel Komarov's launch. Shortly before Gagarin left, the intensity of his anger became obvious. quote, I'll get through to him somehow, Brezhnev that is. And if I ever find out he knew about the situation and still let everything happen, then I'll know exactly what I'm going to do. Rusayev went on to say, I don't exactly know what he had in mind, but I told him to be cautious. And then the authors of the book mentioned that there is a rumor, although it's never proven or documented, that Gagarin did have a meeting with Brezhnev at one point and threw a drink in his face, which is a pretty mild punishment, all things considered. The one thing that I'm sort of stunned happened as well, somehow either in his will or it was stipulated because he knew going in that his death was likely. Komarov had stipulated that he have an open casket for the state
my God.
funeral.
Ooh.
Part of this doesn't quite make sense because in the notes it says only a chipped heel bone survived. Well, nothing survived the crash. The man's dead. So only a chipped heel bone, quote, survived. But the open casket actually happened. And there are fucking photos of this. And what you see is about a 2 foot long, 2.5 foot long, mangled hunk of what looks like firewood, charred, mangled mess. Most of him is just gone. It's just incinerated. But he insisted that happened because these fuckers sent him to his death. And he's like, okay, you're not getting what you're not going to put. Everyone's going to think that I have that my body is this pristine, in perfect shape inside this casket. No, fuck that. You're going to have to own this at least a little bit. And so there was an open casket for this man's funeral. Gagarin, strangely enough, speaking of oligarchs, there have been several oligarchs recently that have died under weird circumstances. Gagarin dies a year later in a plane crash, way before America landed on the moon. I'm not saying it's suspicious, but it kind of feels bad. It smells bad. So anyway, a very compelling and interesting story on a number of different levels for me, but in 2022, we are fighting now against a sea, at least in my mind, of public figures who will happily engage in mistruth, propaganda, and have gigantic egos. And I think this is maybe the law of unintended consequences or something. You just, all kinds of people can get hurt, either by their own actions, due to mental health and dealing with election deniers and things like that, or you're going to have people that are like this that wind up being self-sacrificing in order to feed this beast. And tons of people say, well, this is our current situation in our current society. It's never been like this. I'm like, fuck that. It has always been like this. Ancient Rome. I mean, Genghis Khan, Adolf Hitler, over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. This type of horseshit has happened, and it's happening again right now. Only this time it's America, and it's dangerous, and it's a slippery slope, and it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Couple of things strike me. One, when you played the recording, we did hear their mission control talking to him, right?
Yeah,
the different voice we heard.
The louder voice was mission control, and then the distorted, quieter voice, but obviously very anxious voice,
right? Yeah,
is yelling in the background, right?
Yeah, that's one. I think that's where I heard the horror show was coming from, mission control, as in trying to tell him that everything was okay, but I'm not sure. I'd have to listen to that several times and probably get out a translation book to really listen to it. Secondly, in regards to how you're tying it to today's stuff, it's hard to believe that 72 was McGovern, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Yep. Uh-huh.
It's hard to believe that Thomas Eagleton, his vice presidential candidate, had to be released and taken off the ticket because he sought mental help for depression. He sought help for his mental health concerns. And what we're seeing today is just so beyond the pale of that it's acceptable to behave this way. The way we're seeing people behave. and just this inanity of this idea that there's no such thing as no, you have your facts and I have my facts, and there's no
Right.
verifiable reality that we can agree on in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and there's no way to know or no way to predict how it might, rear its ugly head. I mean, it's easy to be dismissive of, a crackpot like David the Pappy breaking into the Pelosi's home and say, well, he's nuts. Well, yeah, he is nuts. And obviously has mental health issues and needs to face the reality of the fact that all the shit that he believes is not true. But how many folks will wind up facing pain of some sort by insisting that the truth be revealed? I don't know.
Or how much pain will be faced when someone decides that's not the truth, let's make our own truth, a la Sandy Hook and Alex Jones.
Or that. I mean, all of it. Yeah. I mean, it's the same, shit sandwich. It's like, come on. I mean, we're all supposed to be on the righteous side of, the scientific approach that says we gather information and then we make genuine information and then we make conclusions. We don't just make shit up that's convenient for the argument that's expeditious or that's right in front of us. So I don't know. It's troubling, interesting, but mostly troubling for me anyway.
Sorry about the David Bowie joke.
You've ruined Starman for me. I hadn't really connected the two.
All right, you got a curse word of the week for me, Bryan? Because I'm not feeling so hot now.
I do. I think you'll like this one.
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
The curse word of the week this week is the word smell fungus. SMELLFUNGUS. One word. Smell fungus. It's neither a smell nor is it a fungus.
Well, that takes away my first two guesses as to what it is. I was going to guess that it's I'm not even going to try. What is a smell fungus, Bryan?
Someone who is a smell fungus is a person who complains about something that is really, really positive. Someone who complains about, I was on a 3-week train trip on the Orient Express, but my room was really small. Or it really, really, really sucks to have to summer in Maine. That's a person that does that. The person that does that is called a smell fungus. Planting seeds.
Okay.
I'm the gardener of words.
That's good. I like that. And where did this come from? Who came up with this? Any idea? That has to be a more recent. Creation.
Hold on.
Excuse me.
Pardon you. I had copied that into my notes, and then I had failed to. Pardon me. Well, I'm seeing the derivation of this as having come from a sentimental journey through France and Italy. This isn't right. I'll delete this later on.
No worries. I was just curious. It seems like a more recent thing. It's almost like a
no. It's like 16th century.
Oh, really?
I'm sorry, 18th century. But yeah, it's not new.
Oh, well, I guess in some ways we don't ever change. Like you said, we don't ever change. Time for my story, Bryan.
All righty.
So you already mentioned the date. If we're still here in a few days, this episode will have its droppage, and droppage is a word I'll try not to use again in this episode or ever again, really. 2 days from this episode's dropping, it'll be November 10th, which is the 47th anniversary of what event, Bryan? November 10th, 2022 is the 47th anniversary of what event?
Anniversary of the Ides of March. No, of Guy Fawkes
That-
Day. No, I don't know. Nope.
That's wrong for many things. I'll give you some hints. This event, because I've narrowed it down to one damn day in all of creation, Brian. This event occurred in North America, Brian. Does that help?
November. No, it's Veterans Day, isn't it?
Nope. Mm-mm.
I have no idea.
This event took 29 lives.
Da, 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 da.
He's doing that ceiling staring thing again, where he's staring at the ceiling.
Took 29 lives. November.
You want another hint?
One more hint.
This event took place somewhere on the boundary between Canada and the United States.
Woodstock. No. I have no idea.
Finally, one last hint. This event became commemorated in a song which was released
Oh, the Edmund
following
Fitzgerald.
year. The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. That's correct. November 10th will mark the 47th anniversary of the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And we've heard a lot about this over the years, and I thought I'd talk a little bit about what folks think caused it. And it kind of gets to what you're talking about when we talk about structural damage. This is one example of the idiot synchronicity we have. Just a quick summary for those of you who aren't familiar with this, and some folks I realize may not know that this is an actual event, but the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was lost with all 29 crew members aboard on November 10th, 1975 on the waters of Lake Superior. And I hope to be respectful in this story. Much of what I'm talking about comes from an episode I've watched and reading various books over the years, but most of this comes from an episode of the History Channel's Deep Sea Detectives episode, which features the Edmund Fitzgerald story. This was something I saw many, many years ago, and I went and bought it for $19.99 and watched it several times. It's a great episode, and it features lots of input from members of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Society, a group of folks who study nothing but shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. So I've divided this up into a few sections. First, let's talk about the lake itself. Lake Superior is the largest of the 6 lakes which make up the chain of lakes that we know in North America as the Great Lakes. Do you remember the mnemonic that you were taught to remember the 6 Great Lakes, Brian?
No.
Well, it's homies. Homies.
Huron, Ontario.
Huron, Michigan. I is for inferior.
Inferior?
E is for, you don't remember
Erie.
Lake Inferior, Brian?
Yeah, no. I remember Superior. Erie.
Erie and Superior. Homies. The 6 great, there is no Lake Inferior, Brian.
Oh,
I'm screwing around. Could you imagine? It's Holmes is the mnemonic you're supposed to remember. Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, but could you imagine having to, like, you're at a dinner party and people are talking, well, my lake house is on Lake Superior on Mackinac Island. Well, my lake house is on Lake Ontario. Where did you say? Hey, old man, where did you say your lake house was? Where? Lake Inferior.
Right.
Oh, amazing where people can summer these days. Lake Inferior. But seriously, Lake Superior is so called because, and when we talk about surface area and so forth, I need something that's a little bit more tangible to me than just square mileage.
Right.
If you're talking about the fact that the maximum depth is 1,300 feet deep, that I can deal with. That's a quarter of a mile deep. That's a number I can wrestle with. It's an average of 483 feet deep. I can deal with that. But when you tell me that the surface area of Lake Superior is 31,700 square miles, that number to me is like, what the hell does that mean? Well, in the documentary, they say it's slightly smaller in area than the state of Maine. That's how big this is. Maine is 35,385 square miles. So it's a little under 4,000 square miles smaller than the state of Maine. It has a shore length, and this is not including the various islands that are inside the lake, of 1,729 miles. So we're talking about a massive, massive piece of water. So in other words, it's big, right? This is a big lake. You might even say it's superior to the others. So let's talk about the ship. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was 729 feet long. What's a comparison for that? It's as half as long as the Empire State Building is tall. If you balance two of these stern to bow, going up, two of these make up the Empire State Building in length. That's how big these things are. She began duty on June 7th, 1958. She was named for the chairman of Northwest Mutual Life Insurance, which was the company that owned the ship. The day of the christening, that day, June 7th, had a few bad omens. It took 3 tries to break on the bow, the champagne bottle they use. It took 3 hits to do that. And then when the ship was finally rolled off of the pier into the channel, it crashed into the pier opposite and broke it. And furthermore, a man who was standing on the shore watching all of this had a heart attack and died while all this was going on because he was so shocked. But despite all of these bad omens, and sailors and folks on the sea really pay attention to omens and bad signs. Like, you shouldn't name a ship with a name that ends in A, for example. You don't do it. It's considered bad luck. Nevertheless, this ship, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, was, quote, a wonder to behold, and picked up a few nicknames: the Mighty Fitz, the Queen of the Lakes, and the ill-advised Titanic of the Great Lakes. In her 17 years of service, she had 748 voyages on the lakes with over, and this is what blows me away, 1 million miles under her keel of just on the lakes alone. 1 million miles. So in other words, she's a big ship. She's big. Let's talk about the final voyage. As the song by Gordon Lightfoot goes, November can be a rough month on the lakes. In November, the winds on the Great Lakes can reach speeds greater than 90,000 miles per hour. 90 miles per hour.
That is fast.
I'm bad with numbers.
Hang 10.
It can reach speeds greater than 90 miles an hour. Waves higher than 25 feet can break on the lake surfaces. It was under these conditions that the SS Edmund Fitzgerald left Superior, Wisconsin, on what would be the final run of her 1975 shipping season and of her existence period. The ship held one last load of taconite iron ore in excess of 27,000 tons. It was probably more like 27,300 tons. She was bound for Zug Island, that's Z-U-G Island, and it was a processing island on the Detroit River. These taconite ore pellets were roughly the size of blueberries. So you've got 27,000 tons of these in her cargo holds. The crew was led by Captain Ernest McSorley, who had 40 years on the lakes, and his first mate, John McCarthy, who had similar years. And according to his family in the interviews, this was to be his last run. He was retiring after the season. The rest of the crew were primarily consist of seasoned hands, all of whom had many, many years on the lakes, with a few younger guys who were born in the mid-50s, because this was 1974. These were college-age guys who were earning a little bit of money to go back to school in the spring. But you had a lot of guys in there who were in their 50s and 60s, late 40s, a few younger guys, all of whom had experience out there on the lake. So the Fitz set out on a northeast course for Caribou Isle. And the whole idea was they're going to tack around Caribou Isle and then presumably take a slight southeast course to clear that isle, and then a southerly route to Whitefish Point and then into the shelter of Whitefish Bay. And as, once again, Gordon Lightfoot's song says, she'd have made Whitefish Bay if she put 15 more miles behind her. It's pretty accurate, actually. The Fitzgerald at some point lost its radar. She was not equipped with a depth finder, and the onboard charts were over 100 years old. So they might not be sure where shoals are around Caribou Island. This is going to become important. And while they were on this voyage, the ship maintained contact with the SS Arthur Anderson. It's another freighter that was some 10 miles behind the Fitzgerald on the same trajectory. And every time the Anderson got hit with a wave, they knew that wave would eventually hit the Fitzgerald, right? Some 10 miles away. So on November 10th, here's what happened. In terms of communication with the Anderson, because they were having trouble, they were using the Anderson to help figure out where they were and how far they had to go to get to Whitefish Bay and so forth. 3:30 p.m., the Fitz reports to the Anderson that they're listing badly. They're tilting to one side badly. They don't know why. At 4:10 p.m., the Fitz reports to the Anderson that their radar's down, so they're in trouble. At 7 o'clock, McSorley on the Fitzgerald reports to the Anderson's captain that they're doing okay, they're holding their own. But at 7:30 p.m., the Fitzgerald no longer responds to radio calls and vanishes from the Anderson's radar because the Anderson's radar is still working. So they're gone. And that's presumably where their final voyage ends, somewhere in that water between Caribou Isle and Whitefish Point.
Okay.
Now, the ship's gone, and on November 14th, 4 days later, using echolocation, the ship is found on November 14th in two parts, 538 feet down, so they know where it is. They find a little bit of an oil slick, they find some debris, but nothing else. No bodily remains, nothing. Further investigation is delayed until May of 76. At that time, the SS Fitzgerald becomes one of just 6,000 wrecks on the Great Lakes.
Oh my God.
That's a lot of wrecks on the lakes. And I won't go to each of the different dives that occur, but a bunch of dives in the late 1980s and in the mid 1990s lead to a whole bunch of different theories as to what happened. And some say that there were rogue waves, just large waves that tumbled it up over. Some say that the hatch lids blew off because they weren't properly installed and put on the boats or closed properly. Jacques Cousteau participated in one of these, and he led a dive down to the actual wreckage, and he concluded that the ship actually broke up on the surface, which accounts for the two parts on the lake bed at the bottom of the lake.
Right.
But a dive in 1994 really seems to pull all these things together and kind of tells us what most likely happened and what was involved in all of this. First of all, severe weather had something to do with all of this. If the weather hadn't been as bad, this probably wouldn't have happened. McSorley, in one of his transmissions to the Anderson, said, "This is one of the worst storms I've ever seen." It's certainly one of the ones he's been in. The Fitzgerald most likely took on water in one of three ways. One, when she was tacking around, and that's probably not the right word to use, but when she was curling around Caribou Island, she probably hit some shoals and tore up some of the hull, ran aground slightly. And that action was mistaken for wave action because the waves were so violent, they didn't notice it happened. The ship began to take on water there. Number two, the cargo deck hatches were either improperly secured or were structurally unsound, and the ship saw waves of 25 plus feet crash over the railings, and the ship took on water that way. Or three, the weight of the shifting cargo damaged the hull in some way, and the ship began to take on water. So no matter what happened, somehow the ship took on extra water through one of those three means. Once the waves got rough, the bow of the ship eventually dipped under the waves. The weight of the cargo and the water in the hold shifted towards the bow of the ship, and the ship shot 538 feet to the bottom of Lake Superior at an angle at full speed in seconds. The bow sinks into the lake bed at an angle, and the propeller at the stern, the rear of the ship, keeps pushing the ship along into the lake bed, digging a trench. Your mouth is open and you look astonished.
Wow. That's stunning. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry.
So eventually what happens is, and the best way to visualize this is take your arm, and your fist is going to be the bow of the ship. Take your other arm by your elbow and start to twist it. The ship began to torque around the propeller. In other words, the propeller was remaining, because the bow is stuck in the earth, the propeller begins to twist the back end of the ship around itself, and it slowly twists like you're twisting your arm, and snaps the boat.
Oh, wow. Corkscrews
So
it, breaks it in half.
Corkscrews it. So the propeller is almost standing still and starts to move. Rather than move the water, the propeller is literally moving the ship. And it moves the boat and twists it along the long axis of its own body. This action, combined with the shifting weight, causes the center section of the ship of over 200 feet to shred into ribbons, like one explorer called tinfoil, like little bits of tinfoil. The bow settles right side up on the lake bed. The stern is upside down, just the way that Jacques Cousteau observed it. some distance away, and in between these two are the remains of the middle section, which are scattered around as a debris field. That's why there's nothing left of the middle section, because it literally just exploded into tenfold under the pressure. So part 6, what remains behind? So a year after this, in a series of negotiations between the families and the Canadian government, because the wreck is actually in Canadian waters, not American, leads to a moratorium on any further dives in the area. And this was done on humanitarian grounds. There were 2 final dives on July 4th and 5th of 1995. On July 4th, and this is an incredibly tense scene because there's footage of this, an expert diver / welder is lowered in what's called a newt suit, which is basically a wearable submarine. It's a series of rotating joints to where you have a lot of movement without actually having to have a flexible joint, so you can seal it better. This guy has to remove the bell of the Fitz by using an underwater cutting torch, and he separates the metal frame holding the bell from the ship. But because of the angle of the cutting, the excess gas from the torch starts to collect inside the bell as he's cutting. So there's this huge bubble of flammable gas inside this bell at the bottom of the lake. And he is one slip away from like dropping the torch and it igniting this bell. And suddenly there's this huge explosion on the lake bed. So you're watching it kind of with your hand over your eyes, just waiting for something to happen. But he's steady as can be. The frame is detached. But then the diver has to guide the frame up through all the cables and attach stuff. And now you're waiting for something to go wrong and hit him in the faceplate. And then as one guy says, the entirety of Lake Superior is trying to rush in and fill your suit as fast as it can. That doesn't happen. The crane pulls up the entire unit. And all of this is done under the schedule of basically a 4-hour timetable to get down there and a 3-hour timetable to get back up, because the diver has to wait so he doesn't get the bends. So
right. It's detox, right?
Yeah, he's doing intervals. The bell surfaces, and that means the first difficult half is finished. On the next day, a replica bell, which has been inscribed with all 29 names of the crewmen, is lowered to the wreck, replacing the original. Since 2005, the original bell refurbished as part of a permanent memorial at Whitefish Point, Michigan. And that's a very brief story of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. My main sources for this were Wikipedia for basic dates and info, and the Deep Sea Detectives episode from the History Channel of June 3rd, 2003, The Death of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Wow.
And so you're very likely to hear 2 songs this time of year, and that is The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot and Alice's Restaurant by Arlo Guthrie. As we near Christmas, or Thanksgiving, you always hear those 2 songs this time of year. And strangely enough, 2 of the states I've not been to. I've been to 47 of the 50 states. 2 of the ones I haven't been to are Wisconsin and Michigan.
Michigan, right?
Both of which are involved in this story. So one of these days, I want to go up to the Sioux Locks and check out Lake Superior and go to Mackinac and go to all these places, because I loves me a maritime museum. I will go check out a maritime museum any day and look at the models and all that stuff. And this has long been a fascination of mine, different shipwrecks. This one in particular, which has, thanks to Gordon Lightfoot, really, when you think about that song, there's this one critic who wrote that one of the great things about that song is that he really brought folk music to its roots of spreading news about a current event, which is what folk music always intended to be.
Sure.
When you look back at troubadours, they would travel from town to town, and you would carry information from town to town in the form of song. And that's kind of what Lightfoot did here. He read a story in Newsweek. November is the Cruelest Month, I think was the name of it. And he started doing work on it and turned it into a song, which is remarkably accurate. And as we know, we still hear it on the radio all the time. So
yeah, strangely, that song pops up on my Pandora with stunning regularity, because I think I actually listened to it all the way through once, and now Pandora thinks I love the song. And so I hear the first few strains of that song not once a week, but alarming. Like in the past week, I have listened to at least part of that song because it just keeps popping up.
Well, Well, it's on his excellent album, Summertime Dream. The whole album is fantastic. I love that album. But yeah, I mean, it's a great tune, and it's a story that just it's a story that resonates even today. And,
Right, sure.
And the footage is absolutely eerie when you look at the original, like all shipwreck footage is eerie. I mean, just that knowing that what's down there, that it's a marker, and that it is truly, like the family say, it is their resting place. It needs to be left alone. So
Right, sure. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I know the song quite well, but I had no insight into the actual story of it. I mean, I knew it was Great Lakes, but beyond that, I knew zilch.
It vanished in seconds. And there's a play by Stephen Dietz called 10 November. And there's a character in the play who's he's watching the ship go down from the Arthur Anderson. And the character's like, it was gone. Just 1 minute it was there, the next second it was just the lights were gone. And it was just underwater. I mean, they think it shot to the bottom in just seconds.
3 seconds.
Not only was it going, because you lose all of the resistance to the waves, and you are literally an arrow shooting to the bottom of the lake. Just 1 minute there, next minute gone. So.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Oh yeah, awesome. Good story.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. So 2 stories about human fallibility, and once again we kind of come into sync with our stories, but
yeah, it could be all completely unplanned.
Yeah.
But hopefully enjoyable. Thanks for listening, folks. We've wrapped another week of idiocy. So thanks for tuning in. And as we said before, like and subscribe and share and do all those good things. Shoot us 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening to us on. We'd appreciate it.
Yeah, coming next week, I'm starting a 2 or 3-parter, and Bryan has a little hint as to what it is, but just in time for the holiday season. And I've got a couple of holiday stories coming up for November and December, and we're looking to have all new episodes and stories for the remainder of the year. So stick around with us, and as always, be good to each other.
And vote. Bye.
Yes, vote.